Thank you for joining us this evening and welcome to the First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. Before we start, I'd like to invite Rabbi Reuben to join us to say a short prayer for Ukraine.
First Minister, we are here together to hear you speak. And in a few moments, you'll be formally introduced. However, I would like to take this opportunity in thanking you and in recognizing your leadership in the past 2 years since the COVID pandemic hit the world. In particular, I would like to give you a personal thanks for your government bringing together the religious leaders of Scotland on a regular basis in the height of lockdown. Not only did it help us in leading our communities in this difficult time, but it also helped me personally and my colleagues of other faiths. It gave us an opportunity to share ideas and just share time together, creating a friendship between us. And I assume that is the ultimate goal of every government, is to engender respect in society. So, thank you. However, as we begin to see the little sparks of light at the end of the pandemic tunnel, we are faced with a new dark tunnel. This being war of Russia against Ukraine. The pain and suffering is being beamed into our homes and into our hearts. And I'd like to commence this evening with a moment of reflection and prayer. And please ask everyone to please be upstanding. Shiram alois, esreina yelehori, me ayin yavo ezri. Ezri meim Adonai yoseh shamayim v'oretz. Alitein lamot raglecha, al yonum shoymirecha. Hinei lo yonum v'lo yishan, shomei Yisrael. Adonai shoymirecha, Adonai tzilcha, al yad yaminecha. Yomam hashemesh lo yakecha, v'yoreach v'lo ilo. Adonai yishmarcha mikol ra, yishmoid es nafshecha. Adonai yishmar seisecha uvayecha, me'ata v'yad olam. A song of ascents. I lift my eyes up to the hills. From where will my help come? My help comes from the Lord, maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot stumble. He who guards you does not slumber. See, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. The Lord is your guardian. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will guard you from all harm. He will guard your life. The Lord will guard your going and coming, now and forevermore. Ribon ha'olamim shomea tefilat kol peh. Sovereign of the universe, who listens to our prayers. We stand before you in solidarity with all who are enduring the darkness of human conflict in Ukraine. May you protect all innocent men, women, and children at this moment of great peril for them, their country, for Europe and the world. Bring fortitude to the vulnerable, resilience to the insecure, and strength to those who live in fear. Incline the hearts of national leaders towards peace and reconciliation, and bless them with the wisdom, vision, and perseverance needed to end this war and restore peace in the region. Almighty God, strengthen the hand of those who pursue peace, not war. Bring harmony where there is hostility, relief where there is pain, and hope where there is despair. May he who makes peace in high places make peace for all on earth. V'chein yehi ratzon. May this be your will, and let us say Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Reuben. I would now like to invite Howard Singerman, Vice President of Glasgow Jewish Representative Council, to make some opening remarks. He's going to be doing this via Zoom. Okay, so pleasure to see so many of you here. Obviously, the first large communal event since the pandemic began, and supposedly a showcase for our hybrid technology. Things obviously work well when they work. And SCOGEC, as most of you know, is the body that represents Jewish communities in Scotland. And the hybrid project is being led by our Connected Communities, Jewish Scotland Connected project, for which we're very grateful for private funding. We're fortunate to have a good relationship with the First Minister and appreciate the time she's dedicated to fostering a relationship with us and with the wider communities in Scotland.
Now, obviously, for our Jewish communities, the plight of refugees has a particular resonance. The growth of our Jewish community here in Scotland was as a result of pogroms in the late 19th century in Eastern Europe, obviously grew again in the 30s and 40s as the Nazis came to power, and we saw the horror of the Holocaust take place. And I know that this community is as determined as I am, as the Scottish Government is, that we play our full part in Scotland in giving sanctuary to those who need it, who are fleeing Ukraine. We have, in just recent days, of course, welcomed our first refugees, displaced people from Ukraine. Some orphan children from Dnipro arrived here towards the end of last week. And indeed, one of the organisations that was instrumental in ensuring that the children made a safe passage to Scotland was Magen David Adom UK, an Israeli charity that I know will be well known and familiar to many people here. So we have a big part to play in ensuring that we give refuge and sanctuary to those who need it, and certainly the Scottish Government is working hard with partners across the country to make sure we live up to that. How we welcome and treat refugees, in my view, is indicative of the wider country we want to be. Scotland should always aspire to be a country where we are inclusive, open, that we respect each other, regardless of culture and faith and background. And I'm not entirely sure what that signifies. I'm going to just take it, a bit like the Zoom crash at the start, as completely coincidental and not any commentary on what I'm saying. But that kind of Scotland that we all aspire to is one that, just like countries everywhere, we don't always live up to in practice. And I think it's really important that we all recognise that, in order that we can recommit ourselves and rededicate ourselves every day to turning that vision and aspiration into reality for everybody who considers Scotland their home. My view of what it means to be Scottish is very simple. If you've chosen to make this country your home, if you want to live here, you're Scottish and a valued part of the community of Scotland. Nicola referenced a moment ago the discussion I had with Jewish students from all parts of Scotland in January. That was a really frank discussion. It's not the first I've had with representatives of the Jewish student community here. I think I had one a few years, but probably is longer than it feels. I think the pandemic has made everything seem much more recent than it was. But the students who took part in that discussion were very open with me about their experiences, their everyday experiences of prejudice and discrimination, of anti-Semitism, of the fear, and they used that word very deliberately with me, that they feel on campuses across the country, often just from expressing their Jewish identity, and the inhibition that sometimes because of that they feel in doing so. They also spoke to me, and this is, I think, is an important point and an extremely valid point, of the fact that in Scotland, as in many other countries, anti-Semitism is still not treated as seriously as other forms of racism are. Now, these were students speaking to me about their own experiences, but I have no doubt that they were not narrating isolated examples, and nor were those experiences unique to students in Scotland. I've heard these views from the wider Jewish community as well. So that is not acceptable to me as First Minister, and I'm here tonight partly to say to you directly that I am committed to, dedicated to making sure that Scotland is a country and doing everything I can to make sure that Scotland is a country where no one feels fear to be who they are. I don't always get things right. My government doesn't always get things right. Perhaps no leader, no government ever does. But why I value opportunities and occasions and events like this so highly is that it does give me that opportunity to hear directly from you about where perhaps I or my government have fallen short and what we need to do better. But the one thing I want to end on this evening and to say with, I say this from the bottom of my heart, and whatever disagreements we have, whatever disagreements may be aired, and I hope there'll be plenty of agreements aired in the course of our discussion this evening as well, but whatever disagreements may be aired, I really hope that you accept this in the good faith that is offered. This community is an integral, valued part of Scotland. Scotland would not be the country we are today without the contribution of and the importance of our Jewish community. And it is really important to me, for as long as any member of any community, but in particular, I want to make this point very forcibly to you, as long as anybody feels not safe or feels discriminated against for who they are, we as a country and the government I lead have more to do to make sure that we address that. So I'm going to stop there, because some of the issues that we will want to get into more detail will come through the question and answer. And as I said at the outset, and as you know, politicians always keep their promises, I promised to be brief at the outset, and I'm going to deliver on that. And now I'm very happy to answer your questions. As I said earlier on, please, I'm here this evening to hear your genuine, honest, direct views. And that is what I welcome, and that is what I value and consider to be important. So Nicola, with those opening remarks, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, First Minister. I should have said, actually, and you alluded to in your opening remarks there, is that because many of us here are descended from refugees who came from Ukraine over the last 2 or 3 generations, really quite a lot of us. I suspect I'm looking at our colleagues from the Scottish Jewish Archives who have all that information, but quite a lot of us. And in fact, my own great-grandmother came from Odessa. And I have a photograph of my great-great-grandmother, which I'm very proud of. So we're going to take some questions that have been sent in first. Excuse me. First question that was sent in was around the concept of medical ethical issues in Scotland. For example, that of organ donation. Will you give a commitment that the Scottish Government will always protect the right of faith communities to continue to observe their own practices as long as no others are affected?
Yes, I want to give that commitment. I do think it is important that we continue to promote organ donation, obviously, and I know many faith communities have been very instrumental and very involved in doing that. But I think, and although that started with a specific reference there, obviously I appreciate that as a more general question. So I'm happy to go into any aspect of it that anybody thinks important, but I'm very willing to give that general commitment.
That's really helpful to hear. Another question that came in from a number of different people, and we sort of amalgamated it into one question. There seems to be a hierarchy of equality considerations amongst the protected characteristics, where we often see religion pushed out or pushed to the bottom. And how do you think this can be resolved to the benefit of all in society?
I can hear my voice echoing back at me, which is never a good thing. I don't consider there to be a hierarchy. And, you know, that is one of the complexities that we need to embrace and be absolutely clear about. What there is, of course, is, and this is a a word I will use. It's not always a word that I particularly like using because it is sounds quite technical, but there are intersectionalities in terms of, so, you know, you have Jewish women who will, you know, like all women do, suffer some of the discrimination and the prejudice that comes from being a woman, as well as experiencing that in terms of being Jewish, and that will be true across. None of us are just one thing. We all have different aspects of who we are, and therefore I think it's important that we understand equality in that way. But I don't think, and I always try to resist the sense that therefore takes you to some form of hierarchy. I don't consider that to be the case. I understand that perception, and at times, you know, I'm here tonight to answer questions. Some will be about policy, but in terms of my own views, I don't think we should see equalities as a hierarchy in that sense.
I think it's possibly quite a West of Scotland thing because of where religion, what people's reactions to religion and to sectarianism. Certainly in my working life, I found that people shied away from things that had anything, or organisations, anything to do with religion, just because of their own perceptions. So it's something we do come across, but it's good to hear you say that you take that on board. You talked about anti-Semitism, students who face, and one of the things, again, that a number of people have sent in to us and asked us to ask you about is anti-Semitism in political life. So that's particularly from, you can only speak about your own party, but within the SNP, including candidates in the upcoming council elections. Obviously, tackling anti-Semitism is an ongoing process, not a one-off measure. How are you committed to helping us and helping the rest of society tackle all forms of hate, including anti-Semitism, in the SNP and in the Scottish Government?
I can only speak for my own party and government here, but it's important I do that very directly. We need to have, and I am committed to ensuring that we have a zero tolerance to anti-Semitism, to racism generally. And, you know, we have had, as all parties have had, issues to contend with of individual members, candidates, sometimes elected politicians saying things that were not acceptable. Now, I think in any, and this is where, frankly, your views are often more important than mine on this. There is a need to try to distinguish between people who are anti-Semitic, and there should be zero tolerance of that, and also people who perhaps are displaying ignorance of issues, and the need then to try to educate and to raise awareness. And that's not always an easy line to know where that exists and when that is being crossed. And without going into detail, there will be occasions where my party come to Skojec and take your view on something like that in order to inform the decisions we will take. But there are examples, and I won't go into the detail because they are individuals of us taking very, very tough action against people. I know there, you know, very recently actually in the media, there was an instance of somebody some years ago saying something that again was completely unacceptable. And I know that individual is very keen to engage with the community as part of making sure they understand that. So we need to be prepared, not just people like me to say these things, but to follow through. And that is an important part of what I talked about earlier on. This need to make sure that what we talk and say about the kind of country we want Scotland to be is reflected in the actions that we take. And it's probably one of the instances that I referred to earlier on about no leader, no party, no government is ever perfect. We don't always get the judgment called right, and that's why you have a right to call us out when we don't. My party and my government are signed up, of course, to the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, and that is important. And you know, every minister in my government is bound by that. So these are important things, but this is part of why the dialogue and the engagement is so important, because you have a right to call us out if you think we are not making the right judgments on some of this.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that you were right also to distinguish between people who sometimes say things out of ignorance or sometimes in their past. And I personally feel that people have to be allowed to leave their past behind, but that doesn't mean you can't call them out on something, as long as they then are able to say, look, I don't think that now, and I've learned, and I'm more mature, or whatever. We have to allow people the chance to change and to grow and to grow their ideas. I think one of the things that concerns us as a community is the very virulent, very specific anti-Semitism that has appeared over the last few years. And it really does affect the community. And I know that you and I have discussed that on a number of occasions, and I'm sure we'll hear more about it. But it really does affect the way this community operates as individuals and as a community. Thank you. The other sort of side of this is that, and it always comes up on the back of anti-Semitism, is talking about Israel. And you've heard us say before, and I think people would like to sort of explore with you a bit further, your understanding of how important Israel is to us as a community, whatever our political opinions. That means political opinions in this country and political opinions with affiliations in Israel. So to maybe tease out a little bit your understanding of how we respect that connection, but still encouraging challenging debate on Israel-Palestine, which is something that is in the media, and we hear about quite a lot. We're hearing about it in relation to Ukraine. I mean, wherever you turn, this conflict in Israel-Palestine gets brought up. So I'd like to maybe just chat with you a little bit about your understanding of how important that is.
I mean, it's one of the things, to be candid, I always knew intellectually, but has been, brought home to me by my interactions and engagements with the Jewish community, how important Israel is to the Jewish community as that sort of spiritual connection that transcends politics, either here domestically or politics in Israel. And I think that is something, if I'm being candid, I think that is something that is underappreciated in terms of our discussions about these things here at home. And I think that's one of the things that as a leader, I have a role to play and perhaps a contribution to make to try to raise or deepen the understanding of that. I also think it is really important that we draw a very, very firm distinction. And I think we don't always, and I think this is another instance where I would recognise not always getting it right personally. I think we must draw a distinction between the actions or the policies of any Israeli government at the time and Israel as a country and Jewish people in Israel or in other parts of the world, and be very, very clear that the decisions or the policies of an Israeli government at any time are not reflective of the views of the entirety of the Jewish community. So these are really important issues that you, and I'm using the term you here, collectively have helped me deepen my understanding of over the years, and is one of the many reasons that I value interactions like this.
That's really helpful as well. I mean, and it is something that crops up often, and having heard you and explain your understanding, that certainly gives us some comfort. Also, to move on, then we've had a number of questions about funding to engage with learning across Scotland, both in schools and colleges, universities, and other places about Judaism and the Jewish community. I mean, SCOJEC has received funding from your community cohesion funds, which we're very grateful for, and that has some element in it for education. But maybe taking that further into how do we help society in general understand about the community and understand about the issues facing the Jewish community itself.
As I hope I've demonstrated over past years, I'm very open, and the government is very open to discussing how we fund, whether it's in education or in wider society, initiatives and projects and programmes that can deepen understanding of Judaism, of the Jewish community, of the particular concerns of the Jewish community. We do, as you've very generously acknowledged, have funded SCOJEC. We give funding to the Holocaust Education Trust, which is, I think, a really, really important part of ensuring an understanding and appreciation of this generation, of the horrors that happened in the past. A really important part of making sure that these are, it seems a bit wrong to say, given what's happening in parts of our world right now, that these things are never repeated. In fact, one of the most profound experiences of my life was going to visit Auschwitz with a group from the Holocaust Education Trust. But I think there is, and it's one of the issues the students raised with me, there is perhaps a need to do something, particularly within the our education system. Curriculum for Excellence is meant to, as an integral part of what it does, is educate young people about the world they're growing up in, and all of this should be part of that. But given some of the issues we're talking about here tonight, given that I have already talked about lack of understanding, lack of appreciation in some of these issues, there is perhaps more to do in the education system at an earlier stage in the lives of the population, to make sure that there is that greater understanding and awareness. So I am open to discussing how that might be taken forward in practice with you.
Okay, you've actually answered a later question a bit as well. I mean, one of the things we're very keen to distinguish is between looking at Holocaust education, which is vital, but also looking at education. So people talk about living Jews and dead Jews. The understanding about what it's like for the Jewish community in Scotland today, as well as understanding about the Holocaust and the horrors and what we learned from that.
It's really important. I mean, and I'm sure every single person in this room or watching online right now feels this very passionately. It is so important, particularly as the years pass from the Holocaust happening. It is vital that future generations have an understanding of that. But understanding the Holocaust is not the same as understanding Judaism. It's not the same as understanding the principles or the teachings of Judaism, and it's not the same as understanding what it is like for Jewish communities in countries across the world today. So we need to, and this is where I think I'm agreeing with you and happy to take forward a discussion on this. I think we need to guard against thinking that because we have the programme of Holocaust education, then we're doing absolutely everything that is required to deal with some of the root causes of discrimination and prejudice that we deal with.
Thank you. I mean, that's exactly what I wanted to draw out. That's really helpful. So also a number of people have raised this, not just in this occasion, but in the past. And we've discussed it many times, I think, that the Jewish community is not surprisingly suspicious of any ideology that calls itself nationalist. How do you distance your own type of nationalism from those other harmful ideologies?
There is a sort of a view that we've got one word in the English language, love, that describes a whole range of different feelings and emotions. I feel the same about the word nationalism. We've got this one word that describes the whole spectrum, from the kind of nationalism that is often what is conjured up in people's minds when they hear the word nationalism, of the far right, the nationalism that led to the horrors of the Holocaust, the nationalism that's driving what is happening in Ukraine right now, through to the other end of the spectrum, which is absolutely where I would place my own party and wider movement, which is a movement for self-government, for greater responsibility and empowerment, that is not about identity, ethnic or anything else. I said earlier on, for me, the only thing the only qualification for being Scottish, in my view, is that you want to be Scottish, whether, you live somewhere else but consider yourself Scottish, or you come from another country to live here. And, you know, it's a civic movement that is not about identity, and it's not about dividing people on the basis of identity. It's also a very internationalist and outward looking movement. So, you know, I think often I remember a few years saying this at an event I was at, and it was, you know, headlines everywhere. And every time I've said it since, it's headlines again, as if I've said it for the first time. It's in the name of my party, the word national, Scottish National Party. I don't like the word nationalism particularly, because I think it conjures up an idea that is anathema to what I stand for and what my party stands for. If I was to go back, if I had been around or could turn the clock back to the founding of my party, I would probably call it something else, which is not to say I'm going to sort of accept the grief of trying to do that now, but I would have done had I had the chance.
Parties have done so in the
business
past.
convener of my party, as well as your local MP, is in the audience. I could see her under her mask kind of go pale at the thought of that.
Parties have done it in the past. You never know. I'm just looking at the time now. So I think that is we're drawing into the questions that have been sent in and move to questions from the floor. Now, as I said, what we're going to do is if you put your hand up and want to ask a question, if you can put your mask on to walk up, but come to the microphone here in the centre. And then we'll take a few questions from here, and then we'll take some questions on Zoom and some questions in Edinburgh. So can I see any hands raised? Oh, thank you.
I want to know if you have time to bring any more offering products on training. And if so, how many would you bring over?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. You want to answer that?
If there are more orphans who need refuge in Scotland, of course we will be open to providing that refuge and sanctuary. We more generally, what we have been very clear about is that we're not putting an upper limit in terms of numbers of the displaced people from Ukraine who would want to come to Scotland. I think in reality, most people who have been displaced from Ukraine because of the war will want to, if they can, stay as close to Ukraine as possible, because we all hope they'll be able to go home sooner rather than later. But those who want to come to Scotland, I want us to have an open door. We have said, and we've worked with the UK government to effectively create a special route for people to come to Scotland. Apart from the family visa route, the UK government have set up the Homes for Ukraine, where right now people are needing to find somebody in the UK who can provide accommodation before a visa will be granted. We've effectively said that the Scottish Government will act as a super sponsor, so people don't need to do that. They can come here. We will then take responsibility for temporary accommodation while we've put longer term arrangements in place. We said, you know, initially 3,000 people through that route, but ultimately at least a proportionate amount of the total that come to the UK, with no upper limit on that at the moment. So we've got that route in place, which is good. We've got support ready to be provided. There are welcome hubs already established at Edinburgh and Glasgow airports to provide that immediate support. The bit in the middle that we still, and I know the UK government is working hard on this, that needs to speed up is the actual granting of the visas to allow people to come here. That is still too slow, and we're working with them to try to get that speeded up. So, you know, at the moment, I want us to be a place of refuge and sanctuary for as many people from Ukraine who need it.
Thank you. Could I just say also, when you come up to the microphone, could you say your name? Because I don't necessarily know who everybody is. I can't see them behind the masks. Sometimes there.
Hello, First Minister. Nick Black. You've spoken very eloquently about your civic nationalism. How do you reconcile that with having two ministers in your government that really out-Corbyn Corbyn?
Is that too enigmatic?
I guess it. There's no way to talk about John Swinney.
You know who I'm talking about.
Look, I don't agree with that characterisation, but I'm not going to dwell on that because obviously that's your view. I don't speak for another political party. I'm not able to speak for another political party. I do speak for and I'm accountable for every minister in my government. And as I said earlier on, my government is a signatory to the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, and all ministers, before they are appointed to my government, have to be clear that they sign up to that and accept that. And that includes the 2 Green ministers that are in my government. Beyond that, I don't, in terms of broader politics, I don't agree with the Green Party on everything. That's why we're different political parties. But there are, many things that we take common view on. And I think in the interests, which in today's world, I actually think is a positive thing of trying to get people of different political persuasions to work together more than they concentrate on their disagreements, is something that we shouldn't dismiss out of hand. But there is no tolerance in my government to anti-Semitism or to discrimination, prejudice, racism of any kind. And I want to assure you of that very, very clearly.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Okay, my name's Lisa Davidson. President Biden rightly called Putin a war criminal, as you mentioned, while simultaneously acting as an enabler for a uranium swap for fuel with Iran and the nuclear deal. Where exactly do you stand on this deal, given that Iran have notoriously claimed that they wish to destroy Israel entirely and every Jew on the face of the earth?
I'm going to comment on the detail of something that I am not involved in terms of the discussions and interactions between the United States government and the Iranian government. What I would say is I think every decent civilized government should be doing everything possible to stop Iran developing nuclear weapons technology. And I also, I'm not naive. I'm not, I'm not without understanding of the pragmatism required to deal with situations in the modern world. But I do think in tackling Putin, in trying to isolate Putin, trying to stop what Putin is doing, and hopefully, as I said earlier on, holding Putin to account, it is really important that the democratic world doesn't inadvertently embolden other leaders of other countries that are just as unacceptable as Putin. And, I would say that about whether it's Boris Johnson going to see the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia to try to replace Putin's oil and gas. And I would agree with you in the sense of Iran as well. I think it is really important that in standing up for the principles of peace and democracy and the values that I think we would all agree in Ukraine, that we don't somehow undermine those very principles in our interactions and dealings with other countries and other leaders. So I think I would broadly agree with the sentiments of the question you've just put to me.
I think we're now going to go over to Edinburgh to take some questions from the floor there.
Hello, thank you so much, First Minister, for talking to us today. My name is Matis Gioras. I am a Greek Jew living in Edinburgh for the past 8 years. So first of all, thank you so much for making Scotland a second home. Something I would like to point out is that, in my opinion, part of why anti-Semitism is so much on the rise is because the media is reporting Israel unilaterally as the villain. So they're only reporting what Israel is doing as being the bad guys all the time. And I don't think that that is the case. I think both sides can have faults, but I don't think that that's really portrayed most of the time. I want to see if you feel like this is something that you have experienced, and that if you feel like it's fair that Israel is always portrayed as a bad guy, because that gives ground to people to see them, the Jews, as always been. And if that's the case, do you intend to personally, in your, for example, Twitter handle, portray both sides of what's happening? Thank you very much.
Did you get enough of that?
I think I got enough of it. Yeah, I didn't hear absolutely every
You were a bit muffled,
word, but
unfortunately, Marcus.
I think I grasped the question. I think on any issue, and particularly when there are such sensitivities, and particularly where there are deeply held and long held views, and I'm not, obviously this question is about the Israel-Palestine situation, but it's the first part of my answer is more general. I think it is incumbent on all of us and the media as well, although one of the things I do have to be very frank and candid about tonight is I don't control the media, rightly don't control the media, but anybody who thought I did would only have to look at a newspaper. But I think it's incumbent on all of us to try to understand the nuances and see things from both sides. And I think that is true of the Israel-Palestine situation as well. I think many people, and I include myself in this, feel strongly about the suffering of the Palestine people, and I am a strong supporter of a two-state solution and want to see that happen. But in any situation, it is important not to see things as absolutely binary, that one side of an issue is 100% right and one side is 100% wrong, because life, and in most cases that is not the case. And I think it is really important to try to remember that in discussions about the Israel-Palestine situation.
Thank you.
And particularly because of the premise of that question, that a failure to do that can be one of the things that gives license to anti-Semitism, and therefore some of the impact on the community of what we're talking about right now.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Marcus. Is there anybody else in Edinburgh with a question?
This is, I have to say, this is a real sort of innovative step forward for people in Glasgow to allow people in Edinburgh to ask questions at their meeting. I'm not sure I've ever seen this before.
Yeah, I don't think we've got anybody in Edinburgh just now, but we have somebody on Zoom. First question is from John Mitchell. Could you unmute yourself, John?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, First Minister, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to ask you a question. And the question I'd like to ask you is perhaps a question that would never be asked by the mainstream media. And it concerns the political reaction from politicians on the Russia's egregious invasion of Ukraine. And that basis is based on international law. It's infractions of international law. And the call for sanctions must and is similar to the infractions perpetrated by Israel on the Palestinian people. Now, where I welcome the call for sanctions against Russia, it's a bit, appears to me to be double standards. When all politicians call for sanctions against Russia, they do not call for sanctions against Israel for their infractions of international law and the treatment of Palestinians.
I'm not sure what question was there.
Well, my question is,
that was a statement.
First Minister, do you think that it's double standards when politicians call for sanctions against Russia, but don't call for sanctions against Israel for their infractions of international law?
I'm not sure that is the case. To be honest, I think there's a lot of double standards in international relations, to be perfectly frank about it. In terms of international law, the one thing that is, and I appreciate there will be disagreement to this in this room, that is deemed illegal under international law is Israeli settlements in occupied territories, and there are different views taken from that in terms of sanctions and not trading with those areas than there is to Israel more generally. So I'm not sure that the basis of that question is entirely correct, but I think at the moment I think I would rather concentrate on the unity that there needs to be in isolating Russia in terms of what it's doing, rather than taking that question in other directions.
Thank you. Second question, please, from Janet Munday. Janet, could you please unmute yourself?
I've been to many Holocaust Memorial Day events over the years, and it seems to me that they're really missing the opportunity to make the link between the Holocaust and the reasons behind the creation of the State of Israel. I don't know to the extent to which this is under Scottish Government control, but I wondered whether it's something that Scottish Government could encourage to help address anti-Semitism, because I think most people do not understand the reasons behind why the State of Israel came into being as a safe refuge for Jews after the horrors of the Second World War. Thank you.
I think that's a reasonable point, and this is where I'm sort of slightly cautious. I'm saying something that is inaccurate here. I don't think the Scottish Government does decide the content of Holocaust memorial events, but it is certainly something I'm happy to have a wider discussion about.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Raphael Selby.
Thanks a lot. There's kind of two questions I'd like to ask here. The first one being if the First Minister could please outline how she sees a relationship between an independent Scotland and Israel. And then going on from that, if she could also explain why recent attempts by the Israeli embassy in London to meet with the SNP and the Scottish Government have all been rejected.
In terms of the relationship between an independent Scotland and Israel, part of the reason I support Scottish independence is in order that Scotland can be an outward-looking internationalist country, as we are, but play a bigger role in building international relationships. Sometimes, as with the relationship between any two countries, that will involve disagreements, and I'm sure an independent Scotland, as the Scottish Government right now, will have issues of disagreement in terms of the current policy of current Israeli governments towards the Israel-Palestine issue, but that will be the case with the relationship between an independent Scotland and other countries, and indeed other countries will have disagreements in terms of the policy of Scotland from time to time. I have no standing policy not to meet the Israeli ambassador. I get, I can't meet everybody all the time that is inviting me to meet. As it happened, I had a very long conversation with the relatively new Israeli Prime Minister at COP in this very city at the end of last year. I should say most of the discussion was about the vaccine rollout of the Israeli government at the time, which I think led the world actually in terms of, and still is, in terms of COVID vaccine rollout. So I don't have a policy of not meeting the Israeli ambassador, and I'm sure I will do so at some point in the future.
Thank you. Another question from David Zulkand, please. Could you unmute yourself?
My point is, if the First Minister is considering a second national referendum, why would she just be considering a 50.1% majority for such a major circumstance rather than say a 2/3 majority or 75% plus majority? If she's just considering a 50% majority, then surely that makes for more divisiveness within the country, not just from a religious point of view, but from a national point of view.
Thank you.
I think democracy is, and the international standard, if there is such a thing for referendums, are that it's a majority of those who vote in a referendum, and once you depart from 50%, then you have a discussion about what should it be. Should it be 60%, 65, 75%? But if it makes you feel any better, if and when there is a second independence referendum, I'll be aiming for 75% of people voting yes.
I mean, it's just a question that comes up. I'm aware of that. Quite interesting. Okay, Jackie Sevitt, could you unmute yourself, Jackie?
Good evening, First Minister. It's very nice that you have agreed to come along to talk to us. What I would just like to ask, and as I said, I sent this in by email, so it may have already been dealt with, but just to wonder if you're aware of the Board of Deputies Local Government Manifesto. I think we have touched on a number of things tonight, but there's just some other matters that, you know, sometimes can be, let's say, religiously sensitive, you know, things like social care, public health, culture and heritage, and, you know, dispersed and sort of isolated communities. So it's just to see that, you know, people that are providing services are sometimes aware that sometimes Jewish people may experience things a little differently. I'm thinking of things, you know, like end of life and all sorts of things, housing, access to services that perhaps, you know, some services don't fully take into account. So it's just to check you are aware of the manifesto. There is a link online which I sent in. Thanks.
Just before the First Minister answers, I could say that we actually have a Scottish version of the manifesto that we produced for the Scottish elections, and there will be a Scottish version produced for the local elections. But please,
no, I think the general point here is really important, that you know, access to services and the way in which services are provided need to take account of you know, different faiths and cultures and needs of different people. So I think these manifestos are really important. I haven't yet seen the Board of Deputies manifesto. I will make a point of reading that, but also I was obviously very aware of the Scottish version for the election this time last year, and will obviously pay very close attention to the local government version that is published. But I will, in the meantime, make a point of looking at the Board of Deputies version.
And the final question from Zoom is from Colby and Keith in Edinburgh. If you'd like to unmute yourselves.
Hi there. Good evening, First Minister. Thank you so much for coming to spend time with us and hear our views and share yours. Yes, I know we're here mainly for politics, of course, but we'd also like to ask you something about culture, knowing you are an avid reader, and who you are, you know, who your favorite authors might be, including any Jewish authors.
There you are. I've got so many favourite authors. I've always found it really difficult to sort of single out authors that I particularly like more than others. I have been reading a fair bit about Ukrainian history recently, and I have just finished the non-fiction book Red Famine by Anne Applebaum, who's a fantastic writer about Ukrainian history, but also the sort of post-war Soviet history. So I would recommend her writing. And I've also just finished a novel about, well, it's not really about the history of Ukraine, but it touches on the history of Ukraine. But I'll get back to you about my favourite, not just Jewish authors. I always really struggle to pick out individual authors because I read as many as I can.
I'm just impressed you've got time and energy to read.
It's the one thing I do. I don't watch much television, but watch virtually no television. So it's the one thing I do to try to keep myself sane. Notice I said try to keep myself sane. For others to judge whether I've succeeded or not.
And I think there was still a question from the floor here. Over to you, Sammy.
Good evening, First Minister, and thank you for coming to see us tonight. My name is Sammy Steen. I'd like to ask you a question that regards the public statement you made last year in May following or during the Palestine-Israeli conflict. The public statement was put out in your name, and a number of things. I believe that if you look at this community, I believe that one public statement created more fear and anxiety in this community than any other statement that was made. In that statement, you talked about the rights of the Palestinian people and the fact that with you leading your government, you will always be on the side of the Palestinian people, but you did not mention at any point the right of the Israeli people. You also talked about your constituency being very diverse, and you talked about the number of Muslims you've met and the number of mosques you were visited, but you didn't in that public statement make any reference to the Jewish community or to the fact that here you are tonight visiting a synagogue. He also talked in that public statement about how it's abhorrent to attack worshippers in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which was attacked, which was abhorrent. At the same time, there were people attacking Israeli and Jewish worshippers at the Wailing Wall, which is the most sacred part of the Jewish religion, and there was no mention of that either in the public statement. So I don't quite understand why your advisors would give you such a one-sided statement at a time when tensions were very high and there were lots of misunderstandings going on, and that kind of statement does not help. So I'd like to give you an opportunity tonight to address that one statement that was made last year. Thank you.
The first thing I would say is I don't blame my advisors for things I say. I take responsibility for things I say myself. So that would be the first thing I would say. But actually, in a sort of long and winding way, tonight arose from the concerns that were communicated to me about that statement. And I've listened, and hope I've demonstrated I've listened carefully to the concerns that you've summarised there. And as I said at the outset, and we'll see again, I don't always get things right. I feel, as many people do, I feel very strongly about the plight of the Palestinian people, and I'm not going to sit here in front of this audience and pretend otherwise. And not just because of what I'm about to say, I feel personally very strongly about that, but I also do represent a very large Muslim community who will often express to me just as strongly as you will about the Israeli side of this conflict, the Palestinian side. So I will not always get the balance of statements I make right. And when I don't get it right, I think it's important that I recognise that. And I should have been more nuanced in what I've said. I should have reflected more of the complexity of that, as I sort of said earlier on, that I think it's important and incumbent on all of us to do. But I have listened very carefully to those views, and I have reflected very carefully, and I will not change the strength of feeling I have about the plight of the Palestinian people, but I will, as a result of those views, always be more careful in future about how I choose to express things. Now, I don't expect any of you to let me off the hook for these things, but I hope that I demonstrate that I'm not above reproach and I am not infallible. And when I do get things wrong, I think it is important to try to recognise and learn from that, because that's what presumably we want people to do when they get things wrong. And if I can't do that myself, then I can't encourage others to do it.
Thank you. I think that hopefully gives some comfort to people here. I'm aware of the time. Do we have time for one more question? Just one more question. Michael.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicola, for taking my question. My name is Michael Simpson. Both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party have a Friends of Palestine organisation, as well as a Friends of Israel organisation. But to the best of my knowledge, the SNP only have a Friends of Palestine organisation. So can we understand, do we take by that in the SNP party there are really no true Friends of Israel?
No, I don't think you can. And I don't, contrary to what some of my critics might say, I don't personally set up all of the affiliate groups within the SNP. Anybody can come, and anybody here who wants to come and join the SNP and set up Friends of Israel within the SNP is welcome to do that. So, you know, that is, the SNP is open to that. And I know there are many Friends of Israel, and I include myself in this, in terms of people within the SNP.
Thank you. So that's a call for SNP members who want to go down that road to look into it. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to draw the questions to a close now. And oops, my bits of paper. And I'm going to go to Edinburgh to ask Hilary Rifkind in Edinburgh to give the vote of thanks.
First Minister, on behalf of the community, I would like to extend to you our most sincere thanks for your willingness to engage personally with us. We are very appreciative that you accepted the invitation to speak at a public meeting and to answer questions on any matters that members of the community wish to raise. Tonight, First Minister, you have responded to the numerous and wide-ranging questions with sincerity, frankness and honesty, and have demonstrated that you have an ever-increasing understanding of our needs and our concerns. I hope that we are all reassured by your very genuine desire to ensure that Scotland is a place where all Jewish people know they can live, work or study in a safe and secure environment. On behalf of us all in the Jewish community, I thank you, First Minister, for being with us this evening. I would also like to thank both the Scottish Council of Jewish Communities for hosting this event and Jewish Scotland Connected for facilitating the hybrid and online delivery. Projects such as this are of great importance in connecting Jewish people from all over Scotland. My final thanks are to everyone who has attended the event in Gifford, here in Edinburgh, and online by Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Helen. I should also take this opportunity to apologise for the breakdown in the internet at the earlier part of this evening, and I know that means that some of you on Zoom missed the very beginning of proceedings tonight. Thank you very much, First Minister, for your engagement, and it's been wonderful to have a space, finally, a real space, real people in a room to talk to you about these things. I mean, I know we've been able to make good use of Zoom, but it is really, really important to be face-to-face again. And I'd like to invite Perla Rubin to give you a small gift. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow.
You might like that. If everybody could please remain seated whilst the First Minister leaves the building, that would be appreciated. Yes,
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, enjoy it. There's quite a feeling. Absolutely. Appeal to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.